Well, welcome, and thank you for joining us for this first ever Good Trouble Social Justice in Action, coming out of the Office of Diversity and Social Justice. I want to welcome everybody who's here and everybody who's streaming it, and hopefully maybe you're going to watch it a little bit later. That's cool too. So my name is Jalisha Lancaster. I am Director of Diversity and Social Justice here at ODU. I'm also a proud Ohio Dominican University alumni, which I always like to throw in there on occasion for those who don't know me. And I want to welcome Dr. Julie Hart, who has done amazing things in the realms of peace and justice and social advocacy, social justice advocacy in Columbus, afar. I remember a few years ago when you had a Dominican lecture series. You were the featured speaker for a Dominican lecture series, and you really talked about the work that you were doing in helping individuals stay in the United States and not being extradited or being deported. And so that was a lot of great work. And then I saw recently that she was awarded a social justice award for educational advocacy right here in Columbus. And I was like, who's the best person to get us started on social justice in action rather than one of our semi-retired professors who just could not leave us, and which we love, Dr. Julie Hart. I've joined her classes. I know the work that she has her students do. Everything is action-based. So in her nonviolent social change class, she has students actually going out there and advocating to change policies. What she's also doing is making sure that they're signing petitions, they're talking with representatives. She's really getting them out there to make sure that they understand that they can be a social justice advocate right now, right, as students and beyond. So I'm really looking forward to hearing about what she has to say about just her overall advocacy and what she's done here. And maybe she'll give us some anecdotes, but I know specifically she's going to focus on her interaction and her membership with the BREAD organization. So without further ado, Dr. Julie Hart.
Thank you. So we did a little consensus decision making, and it's okay for me to not wear a mask. So I'm going to go ahead. And Jalisha said I could talk about really anything today, and I chose to narrow it down to talking about organizing for social justice and the importance of teamwork, because all the work I do is within organizations. Because I've tried it before joining organizations, and it was working alone for social justice led to burnout for me. And so I always advocate working as a team. And I'm going to talk about the best model for teamwork working for social justice that I've ever been a part of here in Columbus, Ohio. And so I want to start, though, with some definitions that I use in the justice and the common good courses that I teach here at Ohio Dominican. Even though I'm only teaching part-time, I'm still teaching four courses related to, two related to justice and two related to the common good. And so I'll mention what those are because I love them. One that I'm teaching this semester is interpersonal negotiation and mediation, where students learn real skills that they will use in the field and in their marriages and in the workplace in years to come. The second course that I'm teaching this semester is global ethnic relations, which really should be called racial justice. And it helps students build their cultural competency in dealing with people from different cultures than their own. And then I teach nonviolent social change, where, as Jalisha said, students are put in teams and they work on an advocacy project at the Ohio legislative level related to social justice and the common good. So I get them on board with working on current legislation that has been introduced in the Ohio House or Senate, and they end the project with going to legislators' offices in downtown with petitions from Ohio Dominican students and others to advocate for or against a particular bill dealing with justice and the common good. And then I think I've just named three, and the fourth course I teach is in Guatemala. I lived and worked in Guatemala for a number of years in the early 2000s, and that course is called Poverty and Development Seminar. And so we spend 2 weeks in Guatemala. I'm fluent in Spanish and I have lots of context there, and this is a transformative course for students. So I'm passionate about issues of justice and common good, and I'm so glad I still get to teach those things at Ohio Dominican. Because truly, justice is love made visible, as Cornell West says. So the definitions that many of us use who teach these justice and common good courses, justice means giving each person what he or she deserves or what they are due. And then I use the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in my classes to talk about how that's actually fleshed out internationally. And it is fleshed out to include even more than this, but what individuals are due before the law, educationally, economically, housing, wages, benefits, civil rights, etc. Although it varies slightly nation to nation, most of the world's 200 nations have signed on to these international documents, and they agree to some basic laws related to human rights. And then for our common good definition, most of us who teach those courses here use this definition that comes from the Gaudium et Spes, which is the common reading for that course, or Joys and Hopes. And so we say the common good is the sum conditions of social life, which allows social groups and their individual members ready access to the fulfillment of their basic human rights. So when I talk about social life and social conditions as a sociologist, that means we have to look at the laws and the policies within institutions and laws at the city, state, and international level. So I'm going to focus now on RED, an organization I've been a part of for about 16 years, and it is the premier organization that I know of working on social justice in Central Ohio. So they don't talk as much about the common good, but really what they're about is also the common good. So RED is just an acronym, and it stands for Building Responsibility, Equality, and Dignity. And it is a coalition of 43 congregations in Central Ohio. And those congregations are Catholic and Protestant of every ilk, from Lutheran to Presbyterian to Methodist to Apostolic to Baptist, Southern Baptist, non-denominational. We have a lot of Unitarians in this group. And in addition to that, we have at least 5 Jewish synagogues, and on and off we have had mosques. So the mosques are, the mosques have a lot of internal issues that they're dealing with, and they're large congregations, but we really attempt to have all the people of the book together working in this coalition each year. So I'm going to talk about how we organize for social justice. Oops, I don't have all my, well, what this says, I don't know why all of the graphics are not here, but what this says is RED uses 7 forms of power to organize people for social justice. And the first form is a stack of money over here. It's money. There's power in making change in society. But these congregations, these 43 congregations, don't have a lot of money. They have some money. But they kind of balance out their lack of funds because they're competing sometimes with corporations, with organizing people, with people power. So I've started the forms of power that RED has. They have expertise in organizing people. And when we get together, all the members of all of these congregations, if we ever got all together in one place, it would be about 5,000 of us. So that's something that legislators, the mayor, the safety director, the sheriffs, they pay attention when 5,000 Columbus, Ohio voters get together and clap for them, or we don't boo, but we go silent when they don't agree to something that we're advocating for. So RED's excellent at organizing people, but also at working on persuasive communication is they talk to legislators or public officials ahead of time. And because there are about 5,000 of us, we also have connections with people all over town. Connections with lawyers, connections with academia, connections in all of these congregations. And importantly, because we're all people of faith, we have moral power. And moral power comes from the Dominican Sisters of Peace, because they're one of our congregations. And even though I don't think any of you, Sister Diane, who come to our bread meetings wear your old head coverings and that kind of thing, that speaks of a kind of moral power. We have a number of clergy who come to our meetings with their collars on or stoles on to denote, I'm a priest, I'm a pastor, and that gives us a significant moral power of the people that we're talking to. Nuisance power is another thing my students learn about. You can go into someone's office, make an appointment, take 10 people, and sit there until they listen to you. You can make a nuisance of yourself by making multiple phone calls if they're unwilling to make an appointment with you. And sometimes we do resort to nuisance power. It is sometimes the last resort where we can get things done. And then networking and coalition building with other organizations in town who want the same things that we do. At the end, I'm going to talk about some of our success stories over the last 25 years, and you'll get a better idea. Oh, there it is. Yeah. Okay, so there, I just have to push forward. So Brad is great at organizing. So Brad organizes people who do the advocating, and these people are just lay people like me. Brad, the paid organizers for Brad are never up front at our meetings. They're always behind the scene. They call themselves organizers, and then the lay people like me are called leaders. And we're the ones that are up front at these big meetings. We're up front when we're going to a congressperson's office. And we go through a lot of rehearsal, and we have been on the task force doing our homework on the issues that we're advocating for each year. So we usually know what we're talking about. So as I said, we're 43 Columbus congregations, and within each congregation, there's what's called a justice ministry. And the justice ministry then has one organizer with Bread. Bread has 4 organizers. Each organizer with Bread, full-time social justice jobs, they have about 10 congregations that they work with closely. They come to our meetings, they coach us along, they keep us updated, we get to know them well. So each congregation then, like I'm a Mennonite, and my Mennonite congregation, I'm part of that justice ministry and one of its coordinators. And then we have, on our team, we have about 10 people who are also committed to justice issues. And then we have a broader, what's called network of members. Each of us has 3 network members associated with us. That makes about 30 of us. And then each of the 30 of us is in regular contact with 3 other members in our congregation that we are keeping updated. And we are getting to come to the big meetings and the big actions, which for the last year and a half have been over Zoom, but it's still working. It's still working. So we're organized at the grassroots level, but it starts at the big level with these really experienced organizers coaching us along and helping us be the leaders, the upfront leaders, who people trust a little bit more because they know us personally. So Brad organizes 4 major processes each and every year. We go through this cycle of 4. We start in October with doing house meetings. We used to do house meetings, now there's Zoom meetings. And each team member invites about 10 members of your congregation to come to a house meeting. We often serve them a meal to woo them to come. And we ask questions like, what makes you angry in Columbus? Or what keeps you up at night? What are you really worried about? This year we added something positive, and that was, what's going on in Columbus that you feel really good about, that is working well, that ought to be replicated maybe beyond your church or your synagogue, your mosque, or your neighborhood. So there's a very careful listening process. I was part of one yesterday. We did on Zoom. My husband and I did it over Zoom. And we had 8 people who were chiming in on it. And then all of the congregations take notes on what they learned. They send it in to Bread. Bread discerns patterns in what we're talking about concerns us. And they put together about 10 problems that they heard again and again. And we will get together then in November to vote on what's the one thing we want to focus on this year. Each year it's something different that we're going to focus on. The next part of the process is researching the best solutions to the one chosen social concern. And then we meet with Columbus leaders to advocate for those changes. I'm going to tell you a little bit more and show you some pictures from each of these. And then finally in the summer in June, we do an investment drive, and that's for money that helps to pay those 4 organizers. So money is involved, but it's not big time money. Okay, so this is a listening session in a home that we would have done in the past. And it's a great chance to get to know people in your congregation better, but also to hear what's going on in your neighborhood. Now, my congregation looks more like this. We're pretty white and we're pretty upper middle class. And that's a problem because Columbus is about 25% minority. But about half of the Bread congregations represent big minority churches. There are big Catholic churches that have Hispanic populations. There are big African American churches. And for me, I've noticed a pattern over the last 16 years, and that is we usually choose an issue that surfaces from African American or Hispanic populations. Because what my congregation hears about and names as problems are not as pressing sometimes as gunshots are going on every night in my neighborhood, or there's a drug house down the street, or there are a bunch of abandoned buildings, or my kids are flunking out of schools that are failing them. And we don't hear that as much in our congregation. So the diversity of this organization is real important to me. So the research team will be formed after our November meeting, after we decide on the one new issue for this year. And anyone in the Bread Network can join the research team. A number of years ago, I joined a research team on school truancy, and we, through a process of discernment, decided to focus on restorative justice in the schools that would reach out to kids who are missing classes, figure out what's going on and how we could repair the situation to keep them in school. But here is an example of what would happen in a task force. So let's say the problem we vote on one year, which was failing public schools, and we narrowed the problem based on people's stories. So people tell stories in those house meetings, and it could be access to pre-K classes, or it could be a story about early childhood literacy. My kid's supposed to be learning to read in 2nd grade and they're not. It could be middle school truancy, which it was the year I got involved, and high school. It could be high school graduation rates. In some of our high schools in Columbus, that graduation rate is 80% or below. Students, 20% are dropping out. Now, we're doing better on that one, but that was an example prior. What do we do then? Once we narrow the problem down in the task force, we meet with experts to identify best practices. You all have heard the term best practices. In the health field, we do it all the time. We look for what are the best practices that work, have been tried and true in a place like your own. And so, so we really look at cities our size in the Midwest. What are they doing about issues of violence, gun violence in the streets? And then we do a power analysis to identify who in Columbus might be able to say yes to the program, to the policy, to the budget need that we have identified as this is what's going to work in Columbus. We are pretty sure this is what we want. We have everybody behind it. And in that way, we're moving through a process of persuading leaders and negotiating. So the next stage in our 4-stage process is the Nehemiah action. And Sister Diana, I think you've been maybe to one of these. They usually happen in May at the fairgrounds in the Celeste Center, which is a center that will hold 5,000 people. This year we had 3,000 plus people there from all the congregations. You usually sit with your congregation. You can see way up there on the stage we have the mayor coming, the superintendent of schools, we have whoever is representing the person that needs to say yes to our proposal. We have been meeting with them ahead of time through all the spring months, once we had zeroed in on the process, the program that we want to see implemented. And for the most part, they've said yes ahead of time, sometimes not. Sometimes they've said yes to part of it, not all of it. But we invite them to a big meeting and we say, we're going to have 3,000 people there who voted you into office or voted someone who hired you for office. And most political folks will take advantage of this great audience of concerned citizens, right? They will come to this meeting and take advantage of the chance to get their name out there. But sometimes they say no, they surprise us and say no, and they get silence from us or they get follow-up of multiple phone calls from our constituents to say, hey, what's going on? We really like this. So that's the Nehemiah action, and it's named after an action in the Old Testament where Nehemiah brought the Israelite people together to advocate for changes in Old Testament days. And then the fourth part of the process is the investment drive. And that happens in June every year. And what we do is ask BRED network members and BRED team members like me, we ask everybody to try to donate $200 a year. For some people, that's a sizable amount to donate to one organization. But really, people donate whatever they can. And this and a corporate drive is what keeps BRED going. So they have a budget for their 4 full-time staff people of about $250,000 a year. And we don't get any money from grants from the government, not at the city, state, or federal level, and that assures our ability to be independent because oftentimes strings come attached to the federal money, right, or the state money. And we want our independence to advocate for what we want. And so let me tell you a little bit about our success stories, and then after that we'll open it to questions. So I've chosen 10, where generally speaking we've worked on, it's been about 25 years, we've worked on about 25 issues, so about 1 issue a year. But I've just chosen a couple or 10 of them to tell you a little bit about, to give you an idea of how we're working on social justice in the common good. So gun violence has come up as the issue in a number of our congregations a number of years. Currently, what we're working on, and we've gotten, is Columbus through the mayor's office and through the service director who oversees the police department, have invested $500,000 to work with this national organization called the National Network for Safe Communities. Has anybody heard of it? Is that a new one? Okay. They have a 50-year history of reducing gun violence in communities. And so we found them in researching best practices on dealing with gun violence. And they come in and they do a community assessment, talk with a lot of people, look at our stats, look at our police department, look at the sheriff's department. And in their history, they have been able to reduce gun violence in cities they've worked with 40%. And this one's so interesting to me, so I'm going to just tell you a little bit more about how they go about it, because I think this is new. What they do is identify, what we know is about 80% of deaths in a city, a big city like ours, are gang related. And so they come in and identify gang members. They invite various gang members in to come in and talk to a safe person on their own. And they say, what would it take for you to get out of the gang? Do you need schooling? Do you need training of some kind? Do you need tattoo removal? Because sometimes the tattoos mark you as a gang member and it's really hard to get away. Do you need support in getting out of Columbus for a while in order for you to get out of the gang? And they try to work with willing gang members to get them out of the gangs, because they're the ones that are killing each other in the gangs and killing other people in the process. So it's been a very successful program. Has anybody heard of anything like that? Yeah. So we are hoping that after this next step in the assessment process and implementation, that we will be in 2022 actually starting to meet with gang members. I'm really excited about it because, as you know, during the pandemic, homicides are up. Some days we have one every day, according to the dispatch. One homicide every day. And it hasn't always been like that. A second program, and this problem was surfaced in our Hispanic Catholic congregations. Interestingly, they were finding undocumented immigrants or immigrants in the process of getting green cards were having trouble with being stopped by the police and not having correct information, because you can't get a driver's license unless you're fully in the system, right? So some of them have to drive because they still work, even if they're being paid under the table. And the other problem for undocumented folks is they might have a problem in their neighborhood, and it's something you and I might call the police for. They won't call the police because they are afraid that they will be, because the police, what do? They usually ask for your identification. And they don't have any official identification. So the best practices that we learned about in these cases was to have a citywide ID. It would be like your library card, and it would get you on a CODA bus, the public bus system. It would work with the police department, and they would be able to ID you and know you're legit, you have an address, you're not just passing through. And this is what the congregation said. This would really help our people who are in process, but in that process, it would also help elders who no longer have a driver's license. And it would also help the homeless who no longer have a home address. So there are a number of people that would benefit. Our own Mayor Ginther has been resistant to this for a number of reasons, but we think that we're still going to get there. And it's called One ID Columbus. Has anyone heard of this? Okay. It could be used in a number of ways that driver's licenses are good for, but not everybody has a driver's license. Affordable housing is another big one. You've probably read about it. We know that 54% of Columbus renters are paying more than half of their weekly income toward rent. That's unsustainable for people. And so we need more rent in the $600 a month and below range for people who are in that minimum wage range, right? And so we're working on affordable housing with the city council. And we have, you've heard of the American Rescue Plan. This is part of the COVID money that's come from the Biden administration. And we have gotten agreement from our city council for using 30% of that for affordable housing for those making less than $30,000 a year. If you're a family of 4 or 5, you're probably living below the poverty line if your income's $30,000 or less, or you're at or near that. And $10 million for emergency housing assistance. So that's movement forward. We still literally need millions of dollars to provide for Section 8 housing or more affordable housing for folks in Columbus. Here are some other success stories, and then I'll stop and we'll talk. Juvenile justice has been an issue a number of years, and I mentioned this one. One year we worked on introducing restorative justice practices in the city schools, and that has actually kept kids in school and from being suspended because of things they've done. And what it does is get a community of concerned people, students, parents, teachers, guidance counselors together with kids that are in trouble for some reason, talks it out and figures out what would be a fair and just way for them to do community service or make amends for the harm that they have done, but keep them in school. We also, prior to that, in 2018, started a number of restorative justice circles in 8 Columbus neighborhoods. And so that's like doing mediation with kids in neighborhoods, especially juveniles. We want to keep them out of the juvenile justice system. And then there's a jobs campaign. This is fairly recent, 2019. I don't know if you all are aware of this, but one of the groups that has the hardest time finding jobs, and now we know there are fairly good jobs out there right now, right? Unemployment's 5% or less, is people, we call them returning citizens. These are ex-cons. These are people who have served their time, they're now out, but so many businesses will not hire them. They consider them still risky. So what Brent did in 2019 was identify some anchor institutions. One is OSU and one is Children's Hospital, and they are willing to contract with these worker-owned businesses of ex-cons who will provide janitorial service or food service of some kind, something that the large anchor organizations would need on an ongoing basis. They don't have to hire the people full-time, but they will contract with them long-term. And this is employing a number of those those who have a hard time finding a job. We also were instrumental back in 2011 in starting some what are called job incubators, which are sources for budding entrepreneurs to have accounting services and computer services to help them start their businesses. And then the land bank. Any of you heard of the land bank? Because it's been around for a number of years in Columbus. And this was started back in 2009 to provide funds to demolish the abandoned houses in neighborhoods that often will attract drug dealers and others and cause blight in a neighborhood and make it dangerous. So those have been successful programs. And then finally, mental health Clubhouse. One year we really focused on the number of crises that people who deal with chronic mental health have, and that there was no day place for some of them to go to hang out, or if they were in crisis, they ended up in emergency rooms that weren't as equipped to deal with them. So we were able to get the mental health, I'm forgetting, the ADAMH board, whatever that stands for, to set aside a big chunk of money to start this Clubhouse where people can go. It's on a bus route. If they're in crisis, they need to talk to someone. It's a safe place to hang out. And Eldercare, we were instrumental in 2018 in funding social workers to accompany emergency squads who do runs, thousands of runs to houses, often to elderly folks or people with chronic issues they shouldn't be calling the emergency squad to help them pick them up from a fall or to reach for their food when they're in a diabetic crisis. But social workers can identify these repeat abusers of the emergency squad system and get them ongoing health care or whatever is needed so they're not always calling for emergency care. Affordable Housing Trust was started in 1999. That was seed money from the city and more for housing units in 2001. And then Payday Lending, I don't know if any of you have ever been to a payday lender, but their interest rates on your $100 loan or your $500 loan used to be as high as 391%, putting people in this constant cycle of debt. And back in 2008, we brought issue to the ballot in November where we limited the payday lenders to 28%. And so that was real successful. And these are for people who can't get a loan from the bank, and so they're already in difficult shape. And so, again, I want to come back to the definitions of justice so you can see how all this fits in. Justice means giving each person what he or she deserves. And some people in our society need more help knowing what they deserve and getting what they deserve. And so Brad works on educational, economic, housing, wages, benefits, civil rights, all of these things to provide what people are due and to create a social life and conditions of social life which allow for individuals and groups to have ready access to what they need. So I feel empowered just because I'm a part of Bread. And I love this quote that is, I believe, from Columbus. If you give me a fish, you've fed me for a day. You've heard this, right? If you teach me to fish, you've fed me until the river is contaminated and the shoreline is seized for development. But if you teach me to organize, whatever the challenge, I can join together with my peers and fashion our own solution. And Bread is teaching us to organize. And I've brought those learnings to Ohio Dominican in my nonviolent social change class. So hopefully I'm empowering more students. So what's my message? Organizing for social justice can't be done alone effectively. We can't make really big changes in social conditions. It takes a team, and that takes organizing people. My bias is in faith-based organizations because we have moral power and people listen to us, and I think we're for sure doing it for the right reasons. So I will end there and just open it to any last minute questions. Don't you want to join Bread? Yeah, you gotta join a congregation. I've got to get your congregation to join Bread because everybody's welcome to join.
I have a question. It sounds like, so you change what you're focusing on every year, but then it sounded like from those 10 that you were talking about, some of them are kind of more ongoing.
Yes, some of them, like the one I teach Columbus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like, who is keeping up with maintaining that, but while you're also moving on to whatever the next thing is?
So the task force that came up with the best practices for One ID Columbus has stayed together. And they continue to tweak it and work with, in this case, it is Mayor Ginther, to see what his concerns are and how the proposal could be changed slightly to meet his needs, but still meet the needs of the congregations that we're hearing. Yeah, some of these are longer term.
Hard to solve every problem in a year.
It is hard to solve in a year. Yeah, even with all these people behind it.
I think my question might be, when she said, I didn't hear everything, but so they get the interest down to 28% that year. Now, does that go on the next year?
Yes, I mean, it became law.
It becomes law. I see. Okay, so once it's law.
Now, payday lenders have worked around that to add other fees when you take out a loan. But they haven't gotten it back up to 391%.
Right,
Yeah.
that's terrible, that's really.
Yeah, so it puts them in a cycle of debt.
Do you have very large classes here? I mean, are a lot of people getting this?
The core classes are capped at 24, and so my classes are 20, generally they're 24.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
And many students just take them because they fit in their schedule. So sometimes they're really surprised by what they get into.
Haven't you taken some classes to the legislature?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Part of their assignment is that they meet with the representative, they target a particular representative who could, with a yes vote, or a committee vote, they could move the legislation forward. And it is intimidating. So sometimes I will go with them.
Yes.
But I bring in students from the past years who have done it and been empowered by it, and that helps too.
Yes.
Because can you imagine at age 20, most of them are 20, when they're told to do this, and it's pretty overwhelming. But we rehearse it, and actually, I should warn you ahead of time, I usually bring students with the permission of the college president into the president's office so they can see what a legislator's office might look like. And I asked the president so Bob Tracy did this a number of years, to act as if he's a legislator and to treat the students and to allow them to rehearse their issue that they want to talk to the legislator about. He did a great job with them. And I think it lowers their stress a little. And he talked to them about when he's done this in the past for various issues and what they, gives them little pieces of advice, what to wear and how to do the handshake and all that kind of thing. So I'm guessing you could do that too.
Absolutely.
I'm sure you will. But it's really important for kids to learn this. This needs to go on everywhere in the world.
Yeah.
We have a lot of sisters that belong to Bread. I know them. I don't belong, but I know a lot do.
A lot of the sisters go, I love to have them.
So Julie, if somebody doesn't want to or doesn't have the capacity to get involved in a huge organization such as Bread, how can they join other types of teams to do some of this social justice work? Or do you know of any other smaller scale teams that are local in Columbus at all?
Yes. I'm part of, it's actually an Ohio team of Mennonites, very specific to Mennonites, who are working for environmental sustainability. And our coordinator, there's no budget for this. We're a group of about 25 Mennonites who are passionate about environmental issues. And each week she sends us an update on legislation that we write to our legislators about. So I was doing email, I was doing phone calls. Right now I am handwriting letters because I have a little more time because they tell us the handwritten letters.
Sure.
So it takes me all of 15, 20 minutes a week. And our coordinator's willing to do, she's also retired, and she's willing to do the background work. She gets information from the Sierra Club, but also she's really keeping up with legislation in the Ohio House and Senate, but also at the federal level. So that would be a small scale.
I imagine that this kind of work also has a lot of setbacks and failure, rejection kinds of things too. I mean, that's not what you focus on today, which doesn't make sense, but just how do you stay motivated and keep on going when it gets hard?
Yeah. The one task force that I was on restorative justice, we had a lot of success, and we dealt with a judge who was so receptive, Judge Gill. So I haven't had that experience with Bread, although I have in other areas. And I hear from Bread, we have this meeting with so-and-so, they usually let us know about this. And we've gone back to the drawing board, we're addressing some of their concerns. I think here's where a team comes in also, because if you are losing heart usually there are a couple of other people on the team who are just motivated by rejection. Or the organizers with Brad say, it's okay, we've dealt with this kind of thing before, let's take a little break. And people working for social justice have to take breaks, whether it's 2 weeks or 2 months or sometimes 2 years. And they have to regroup and come back. But if you're dealing with so many people, usually someone new will step in. I'm impressed with our One ID Columbus because they, forget, was it 2016 when we first did that one, and we still don't have it. But they're hanging in there because it's still such a felt need, especially in our Hispanic congregations. And so the Catholic Church is real involved in this one. And I think it's Christ the King that's on the south side of town. The priests there have just been
It takes the priest, it takes the leader.
Yeah. So that's made a difference.
It's wonderful. That was a wonderful presentation.
Yeah, very good.
Thank you.
I hope that a lot of people watch.